um, and then 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. So during the presentation, if you have any questions, be sure to put them in the chat so that we can reference them later and we don't forget, you don't forget. Or if you feel more comfortable during the Q&A session, I'll make it clear that you can unmute yourself and speak and ask your question if you'd rather do that. So both of those are available. And yeah, with all those details out of the way, we can get started. So first of all, hi, my name is Daniel. I'm a project engineer here with Design Outreach. I started working here in March of this year, and it's been great. I actually graduated very recently after studying mechanical engineering and came to Design Outreach because I wanted to look for a career that combined both my studies and my faith. So that's been great. And today I'll be your host and MC. So, and obviously today we're discussing the recent Kenya trip that our team took from October 23rd to November 7th to Kenya. And we're very excited to share all that we did there and the impressions and takeaways that we had. So to give some context, just to make sure everyone's on the same page, we take a lot of trips to the field to implement the designs and the work that we do here in the United States, overseas. So on this recent trip, the team installed the first LifePump Plus in Kenya, which includes not only the LifePump itself, but also LifePumpLink, as well as additional training. So they provided training to equip new LifePump technicians, as well as further develop the in-country supply chain. And in that process, they also visited previous sites that we had already installed LifePumps there, and we're now coming back to check up on them or do hardware updates. All of this work allows us to maintain our commitment to these communities, as well as dream and plan for how we can impact more communities in Kenya and beyond. So that's kind of give you a little summary of what we'll be talking about. We would usually have our co-founders here, Greg Bixler and Abe Wright, if you're familiar with them, for virtual coffees. However, they are currently in Africa themselves, in Malawi and Zimbabwe, doing field work, so they could not join us today. So you got me instead. But the focus isn't on me, it's on our panelists. And at this time, I want to introduce the three of them. You can see here, David, oh, there's the slide, David, Steve, and Rich. So I'll let them say a little bit about each of them, their name, their organization. Oh yeah, share your name, organization, title, and how you came to be involved or work with Design Outreach. So we'll start from left to right. David, you want to go first?
Yeah, so my name is David Palmer, as Daniel said. I'm a mechanical engineer with SonSet Solutions. And so SonSet Solutions has worked very closely with DO throughout the process of developing the LifePump, and in particular, the LifePumpLink. So that's something that we make here. So my first exposure to DO is back in 2014. I traveled to Kenya with Greg way back when, and ever since we've been doing lots of different projects along the way.
Yeah, Steve, SonSet as well, and I've been here close to 20 years now, and I run the manufacturing aspect of SonSet Solutions. Got connected with Design Outreach maybe 10 years ago. Rich and I started on the very early days with a trip to the Central African Republic, mainly because we had the little satellite technology piece that Design Outreach was looking for, but we've had a happy relationship since then, 8 or 9 trips together with Rich, all enjoyable, mostly enjoyable, all enjoyable.
Yeah, I'm Rich Arthur, and yes, we have had mostly enjoyable trips. I haven't got on Steve's nerves too bad. A lot of those. I work at Exact Machine Corporation. At Exact, we do a lot of the production for Design Outreach on their pumps, and I serve on Design Outreach as the manufacturing director to help source and acquire all the items they need for LifePumpLink, the pump, and any other items that may come up.
Great. We're so happy you guys are with us, and thank you for taking time to be on this panel and talk about your trip with us. With that, I will actually pass the mic right back to Rich, who will start to share about some of the highlights from their trip.
Well, the map shows where we were at. The red section there is Kenya. It's on the east coast of Africa. It's a the equator passes right through Kenya, and we actually went from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere during our trip. A lot of people think of just a very dry, arid place when you see things around the equator in Africa, but Kenya has mountain areas, and we actually were staying in Kapenguria, which is up in the mountains. We had some nights that were clear down into the mid 50s, which is not what you prepare for when you're headed to Africa. Usually you're ready for the high heats. So it was really neat to experience all the different climates and areas of Africa while we were there. Design outreach actually started, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. In Kenya, we started working there in 2014, and we have installed several pumps and trained World Vision for their pilot program. We trained them on installing pumps. We did 2 of them while Steve and I were there in 2014, and World Vision went on to install 3 other pumps on their own. And during that trip, we met some people, made some very good relationships with the director of water for World Vision, Francis Huhu, and 2 of the pump technicians, Juko and Washira, which played a really large part in the trip that we just had as well. So it's kind of neat to see how things started in 2014 with some relationships with a few pumps, and then led into this trip here. One of the main reasons that Steve and I really like to go back to, wanted to go back to Kenya was in 2018. We had traveled to the western part of Kenya, and we were providing training to 3 new partners on how to install the life pump, maintenance life pump. And during that trip, we had the opportunity to go to a village, which was called Shivakala. And that was one of the original pumps that World Vision had put in 2014. When we arrived at that village, we talked to the villagers and found that the life pump was not being used by everybody. They said it was too difficult for the young children and the older people of the village to operate the pump. And they would actually travel 1 to 2 kilometers to a different water source because it was just too hard for them to use. Steve and I were a bit distraught in the fact that we knew we had developed new technology, that it was possible to make that pump easier to use. And we were very upset that we didn't have the tools with us, and we didn't have the equipment and the parts that it would require to upgrade that pump. So we made it a point to say, this is undone work. We want to get back, and we want to put this pump up to the standards that we have now, bring it up to date, and provide water for these people in a much easier fashion. So that was 2018. In 2020, Village Economic Empowerment ordered a pump, and part of the pump being sent into them, we included the pieces and parts needed to upgrade all those original World Vision pumps. And so when they needed to have their training done, we said, okay, we're going over to train V on how to put pumps in. We're going to install their first pump. And that was a primary goal of this trip, which went very well. But we said, okay, while we're there, let's see if we can get to all the World Vision pumps. You can go ahead and advance to the next slide. The Shivakala pump was the one we were most excited to get back to during this trip. So we made it there on October 31st, and we were able to pull that pump out, examine all the different pieces and parts. We were able to put a brand new foot valve, a new PCP in, some coupling nuts, a new gearbox. And once that pump was reinstalled, it was so easy to turn that the young kids were all able to turn it. They were very happy. The whole village was just elated at the fact that they were able to start using this water source in a larger capacity because of how easy it became to use. So it was really neat to see how our heart's desire of 2018 came back, and we were able to fulfill that and provide the village with the water they needed in a fashion that was easy to use. All the different places we visited during that time, have similar stories, and obviously we can't focus on every little thing that went on in the time we have. But David, you have one about Boreal, I believe, that you could go ahead and share that.
Yeah, so one of the pumps we were able to visit was in a village called Burio, and this is one of the original life pumps in Kenya. So after Steve and Rich did the training in 2014, this was actually one of the first ones that the World Vision team installed all on their own without any DO staff in the country. And they did a great job. We turned up at this pump. It's fairly remote. It was quite a drive to get out there, pretty rough roads, but we were amazed to turn up and see it still working. And so 3 out of the 4 World Vision life pumps that we went to were working just fine with no issues when we turned up. Now this one in particular was a really good case for a life pump because originally there had been a solar installation here. The problem was that would pull too much water for the aquifer. So what would happen is it would run the borehole dry. And so really a life pump, it's like the village can pump that all day and it's never going to dry out the borehole. So it was really a good place to put one. But we learned when we got there that it just wasn't getting used very much. There were kind of 2 main issues with that. So one issue was that the pump is on private property. So it's on a farmer's land. And just this past year, he had planted a big crop of corn. And so he didn't want the community to use the pump. So he blocked it all off, which was unfortunate to hear about when we got there. But the other issue with the pump is that it was just really hard to use. So these were, as we talked about, some of the earlier technology for life pumps. And what that meant is the pump works well, but it's just hard to turn. You know, it's not an easy, it requires a lot of effort to use. And one of our goals was to, address that issue of the difficulty of use. And so you can put this first picture up there. One of the people there, Grace, who's in the pink dress, she's 75 years old. And when we got there, she could not use the pump. It was too hard for her to turn. And that was kind of part of why the community had mostly abandoned it. They were okay that the farmer had blocked it off. And so, turning up, that was unfortunate to see that people really weren't using it. But we were able to do upgrades. So with this one, we didn't have to pull the whole pump out, which was because it, the PCP and everything at the bottom was fine. It was working great. So we changed the gearbox to a lower ratio that made it easier to use. And one of the direct results of that is someone like Grace was then able to actually use the pump. So with the upgrades we did, we left the community where, little kids and 75-year-old ladies, you can go to the next picture, could use this pump. So there's the finished product with an upgraded gearbox on it with a LifePumpLink. And if you go to the next picture, you actually see Grace using that pump with a big smile on her face because she hadn't been able to use it before. The other big benefit to us being there in person is we were able to interact with this guy who owns the property and broker a deal, so to speak, to allow the community access to the pump. And because we have a LifePumpLink on there, we can actually hold this community accountable. We can ask, are you using, is this landowner actually allowing the community to use the pump? And the good news is he is. We've been seeing data that the community is using it for 2 to 3 hours every day. So, the life pump is providing access to clean water in a remote community, but it's also providing access in a way that people can actually use, which is one of the things we've realized is really important for these communities. Is if you give them a pump that works, but it's just really hard, they probably aren't going to use it. So it needs to be something that's really appropriate to the context and to the people and what they're actually going to use culturally. And so that was part of this trip. So Steve's going to tell another story about a couple other places we visited. So I'll turn it over to him.
Yeah, one of the real highlights for me was turning up at this village called Mawala. Go to the next slide. So Rich and I had installed this pump in 2014 in this village. It's about maybe 2 hours east of Nairobi. And as Rich said, when you change altitude, you change the climatic conditions pretty quickly. So this is in a pretty hard, dry valley. It doesn't get a lot of rainfall. It's a difficult place to live and work. And so it's the right place to put a life pump in. And so I had 2 reasons, like Rich, to go to these places to visit. When there's new technology and upgrades are possible, you can make a pump easier to use and monitor it better. That's a big incentive to go. But secondly, you know, one of the claims of the life pump is longevity. They claim, design average claims, they last a long time. They last longer than any hand pump in the world, minimal maintenance and that sort of thing. So we'd heard that these pumps had been running for 7 years, and it's almost kind of hard to believe until you actually see it yourself. And we do all sorts of parameter checks when we turn up, and it had actually not changed at all, volume-wise or production-wise or output-wise since 2014, which is really amazing. So anyway, we had the joy of doing a few things to upgrade that pump and make it a little better. Miriam there is the person who recognized us from 7 years ago. She's got the blue shirt with the yellow circle on there. Prior to the life pump being in her village, she would have to go down to a dry riverbed and dig down about 6 or 8 feet down into the riverbed, and then wait for the water to trickle out of the sand. And it used to take her hours and hours to fill up just a 5-gallon, 20-liter bucket each day. So that was that's a hassle. And she was really thankful that the life pump has changed her situation. Now she can just pump for a minute or 2, get the water she needs, and save hours and hours of trying to, you know, get water out of the sand in this dry riverbed. And of course, dry riverbeds tend to be seasonal anyway, and so water access was very difficult. So Miriam literally said it changed her life, and it's given her more time with her family and lots of other opportunities as well. Miriam's holding an audio Bible there. We'll go to the next slide. In the course of talking to Miriam, she made all sorts of really nice comments, and one of them was that she wanted to see us again. She had recognized us from 2014 and saw us again and said, "I want to see you again." And we're always looking for opportunities to gently and in a non-offensive way share the gospel. So that was a great segue into sharing the gospel with her and the people around there at this point shown on the picture. It's a very easy transition in Kenya or any dry place where there's hand pumps to talk about John chapter 4, that if you drink that water out of the pump, you'll be thirsty tomorrow, but there's a type of water that wells up to eternal life, and share the gospel that way. So the beautiful little segue there was to be able to share the gospel in the context of saying, we came to this place because we want to see you again. We want to see people in heaven. And so that was just a wonderful experience and opportunity to make the gospel known to her and the people around there. But as we talked to Miriam and saw her context and surroundings, it gave us a clue into something larger than what the life pump is used for. From our perspective, we generally think of the life pump as get your water for the day, so you can do your cooking, do your cleaning, drinking water, that sort of thing. But when a reliable water source is given, like the life pump, people use it for far more uses than we comprehend. We'll go to the next slide. Miriam inherited some land from her family. It's a family plot of land there. And because of her sort of enterprising and entrepreneurship leanings in nature, she's turned her property into a gigantic orchard. Those are mango trees. She has orange trees. They grow a drought-resistant type of pea there that they sell. And so Miriam actually takes the water from the life pump and uses it to irrigate her property. And she has a thriving business there, and it's a harsh climate, but it works very well for her. And so it's just a little understanding of what happens in a community when they get reliable water sources that they can count on. They become very industrious, very entrepreneurial, and they can make a really good living for themselves just because they have the reliable water. We've got another shot of that as well in the next slide. This is a different place. This is not Mwala. This is heading up further north in Kenya. This is very close to the Ugandan border, like a mile away. And this is up in the Rift Valley. And the Rift Valley, you drop down from the nice, cool mountain, fertile areas into this harsh, dry valley. In fact, the Rift Valley starts in Kenya, goes all the way through to Israel. The Dead Sea is part of the Rift Valley, for example. And so this is the beginning end of the Rift Valley. It's very low, it's very hot, it's very dry, terrible conditions. But here is another community that happens to use a life pump for far more than just personal use. It's not a large community, but they've made good use of their water source by feeding their animals. There's some cattle, lots of goats, and they actually run a really good husbandry program there to take care of themselves. At least in the Rift Valley there, with these people groups, they tend to carry their value in stock, as in literally animals. And so when you see camels walking around, that's their collateral, that's their investment, that's their income, that's their walking bank, so to speak. And so, you know, taking care of animals is a very important thing for these people. And so the life pump actually enables that. You'll see just how much they use this pump in the next slide. This place, Mamlu Teach, or whatever it's called, you can see that November 3rd, we put this monitor on, and it was only a partial day, so 3 hours, but every day thereafter, it's been between 6 and 8 hours used per day, averaging out at 7 hours a day. And so this is a really important pump to them, a really important water supply. And like most of these places, the alternate water supply is not very easy to access. It's really tough to go there. And so it's great to be able to help people in this way. And better still, when we come back to the office, we can see what these pumps are doing. We don't have to guess at the impact of them. As Rich said, we cannot highlight all the places we went to, but there's another pump that's of particular interest to us because of its location. And it's kind of like a pump that is in a very high need area, very high risk community. On the next slide. If you go further up in the Rift Valley, and in fact, this is a 3.5 hour drive from the nearest main road, very deep, very remote, not actually roads going to this place. The last 10 or so miles is actually just goat tracks that you drive through. There's not even a road. And, you know, Google says you can't go here. There's no roads here, but you still have to go there anyway. So these people are in a remote place. This is the perfect place for a life pump where reliability is important. It's a very deep pump. It's 87 meters deep, which is 285 feet. And so it's allowing people to get water out of their bore at that point. It's a high risk community because they just don't have a good access to any other water supply that's readily available. Any groundwater is dangerous. It's just a difficult place to work. And so Rich and Dave might share a bit more about that.
The only thing I'd like to add into that is just how that is a perfect textbook location for the life pump. When you think of needing something that's going to be durable and last a long time because of the location, like Steve said, 3.5 hours to get there on paths, not even roads. So servicing it, if it goes down, the opportunity to get back out there is going to be a long time that they'd have to go without water. And as he mentioned, there's just not other opportunities to get water around other than the pump. We drove through several dry riverbeds when we were going out through there. It's just a very, very difficult place. So how remote it is, the need for the water, and the need for uptime on a pump like that, it would be exactly what you would say if perfect for a life pump. There's no other pump I would want out there if I were living in that area or had to depend on water, that's for sure.
So apart from the need for just a really good pump here, one of the benefits that Steve, Rich, and I get to see is just the ministry that happens on the ground. So POCOT Outreach Ministries, or POM, it's just an amazing ministry. They're someone that we love to work with, not only because they're competent in terms of technical things with pumps, but because they love the Lord, because they are doing things with an eternal focus for an eternal purpose. You know, when we turned up at Capitoy to pull this full pump out to spend most of the day there, Benjamin, who you see in the picture, who's POM's community liaison, he hops out of the car and he just starts interacting with the group of people that have gathered around the pump. And for the next 5 or 6 hours, you can, you know, you look over and every time there's Benjamin, he's just chit-chatting away, you know, building relationships there, interacting with the community, engaging with the community. And that's something that Steve, Rich, and I could never do. You know, we don't understand the language, we don't understand the culture, but Benjamin's a Pocock guy. He's a pastor. He loves the Lord, and he's really good at what he does. And so it was just a joy to be able to watch him work, even watch, you know, that's what his daily life looks like, is interacting with these communities, building relationships. And in this particular case, as is with the case, excuse me, as is the case with most pumps that POM puts in, there was actually a church nearby. You can go to the next picture. And so this building here is the church that POM has planted in that community near the pump. And so a lot of the people that Benjamin was interacting with while we were working on the pump go to this church. They're part of this church. And so there's also this aspect of strengthening and building up and encouraging the church that happens in these moments. And just to kind of give a little background, so through the use of this method of meeting both spiritual and physical needs through things like LifePumps and other water sources, POM has been able to reach the Pocock people in a pretty unique way. 30 years ago, the Pocock were an unreached people group. And today they're a partially reached group with hundreds of churches planted, solely because of the way that the Lord has used the work of POM in reaching this group of people. And so one of the other things that we like to do on these trips is we're always looking for ways that we can better just help and equip ministries. You know, what are things that are unrelated to LifePumps directly? What are things that are unrelated to what we do? There's just another thing we can use, another tool, another way to make the most of the time that we have. And so one of the things we like to take are audio Bibles. Steve talked about those a little bit. But this picture shows Benjamin with a number of audio Bibles that we were able to give to POM. And these are particularly useful for POM's ministry amongst the Pocock, because the Pocock have a pretty big issue with literacy rate. Many of the people cannot read. And so if you're a pastor trying to reach this group of people, well, what do you do when you're not in your church meetings? How do you get the word of God into their hands? How do you try to help them grow and encourage them beyond those times when you're with them physically? And so audio Bibles are a great way, a great tool for these pastors to just strengthen and grow their churches and their congregations to be effective parts of the body of Christ. And so ultimately, LifePump's a part of that too, though, and you know, the work that we do and the work that DO has done, because it's helping POM to better meet the needs of communities, to care for them well on this physical level, which Steve's actually going to talk more about that connection that POM makes, because it's not just about planting churches in these communities, which is why they do water, but they do a lot more than that. So I'll let Steve share that aspect of the ministry.
Yeah, this go back to the picture of the pump. It's become a kind of a serious business. When Rich and I first started traveling, you know, we went to the Central African Republic, we've been to Mali together, to Zambia and other places like that. And it used to be fun to go to a new country and, you know, experience the culture and the location and all that. But as I've seen in these communities like Capitoy, it becomes a very serious business. And Benjamin helped us understand just why LifePump is so important. When Benjamin sits down with the community, he's not only making friendships and relating to the people, he asks some very specific questions. Some of them questions are about the church, some of them are about their physical health. Benjamin actually records 4 things. He says, in your village, how many cases of typhoid do you have? In your village, how many cases of cholera do you have? In your village, how many cases of dysentery do you have? And how many cases of malaria? Now, they're all loosely related to water except for malaria, and he wants to get a general idea of the health of the people. And so when the water access is denied and restricted, other problems turn up. And, we're not talking COVID problems here. We're talking far more serious things that kill people, like malaria kills people, and so can dysentery and things like that. But in this particular village, something new turned up that we had not come across before. Benjamin made a note that they have a very high number of miscarriages there. And because I don't know anything medical, I thought I'd ask a doctor and a couple of nurses when I came back, was there a contributing factor in water, perhaps, and bad nutrition towards miscarriages? And the answer appears to be yes. And so when you think about a community like that, it's a serious business to think that, technology can actually save people's lives. When you talk about pregnancy and birth and all of these sorts of things that are largely dependent on, the physical health of people, the LifePump is making a tremendous difference, and it's a sobering thing now. It's more of a serious business than just having fun traveling to countries. It's actually asking the right questions about what makes a difference for these people.
Wow, great. Thank you, Steve, David, and Rich for sharing. I was learning a lot myself even. And if you all don't mind me sharing a little bit, I actually had the privilege of traveling to Zimbabwe earlier this year in the summer with 3 other design outreach teammates. And we were doing a lot of new pump installations there. And it was just interesting for me as I was listening to compare and contrast how, when we were putting these new pumps in, it was with the hope, the expectation, the longing that we would also see these long-term outcomes eventually, that people would learn to, or just when they know that they have dependable, clean water, access to that water, they can invest in the future in things like gardens and raising livestock. And but I guess we were just at the outset of that, and to hear your stories of going back to Kenya and seeing those things actually come to fruition it's really neat. So I really like that point about your stories. At this time, we will move to Q&A. So if you all have any questions, please write them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and speak it out loud if you'd like. And then we will, we'll be looking through that chat to make sure we get to everyone's. While you're thinking, take some time. I have a few questions of my own. I'll start off with, how did COVID impact your ability to travel, get in and out of the country or work in the country? I know that's on everyone's minds these days, so I'm curious how that had an impact on your trip. Rich, do you want to start with that?
Sure. Yeah, basically, the biggest impact COVID had was getting into the country and getting out of the country. In the major cities, a lot of people are wearing masks and taking all the precautions just like we do here. However, when you get out to the village, COVID's very little spoken of it. It's not much of a concern. Like Steve said, they have other items that are a little bit more relevant to them for their health that they worry about. COVID's not one of them there. But yeah, other than a little anxiety, just to make sure you get a negative COVID test so you can leave the country and come back home. And a negative test when we went in, there wasn't much effect actually on the trip.
Gotcha.
So for the time being, we have to travel with negative people.
That is true. All right. Some questions are starting to come in. Let's see. What is the typical or common way that people get water in the remote parts of Kenya that you mentioned? So I guess the question presumes if it's not a life pump, what do these people have to go to get water?
Well, generally there's about 3 sources. Ideally, someone's come in from the government or whatever, a private company, put in a great big solar system, very expensive and dependent on funding. That's the ideal case to meet a large number of people there. The second one is hand pumps are still common there. India Mark II and Aphrodite are very common, but you don't have to go too far to see the problems with them. And the reliability is not there. The problems associated with the bore and the community and the pump itself, and when is it replaced and repaired, and how does it all work? That's not a very encouraging story, to be honest, which is why the life pump is so important. The third way is sources they find, and this is the very sad case of digging holes in dry riverbeds to get water. There's generally water down there, but you've got to keep digging to find it. This is open water sources. This is places where there's waterborne illnesses everywhere. And so it's not a very encouraging picture when there's not a good, clean, reliable source.
All right, thank you. Next question, let's see. How many different people groups did you come in contact with? And I guess I'll expand on that myself too. How many people do you think were ultimately impacted by the life pumps that you installed or the work that you did?
Well, there were definitely, 5 distinct people groups. I mean, and in Kenya, they are still very tribal in a sense that they identify with some of the major tribes around. And so we had encountered those. And when you go from the Nairobi area out to the Pokot area, it is totally different in culture, the people, and what have you. So there were several different people groups that we encountered. And how many would you say that were touched by the pumps that we were at, Steve?
Yeah, Benjamin and the other guys try and get the best count they can. They kind of have to average a little bit because you don't exactly know. They can usually count the first, for example, a school we went to, 200 people, easy to count. Villages, 300 people, that's easy to count. But at some point, especially in the Pokot region, it becomes harder to find out who actually comes to the pump. And so in a roundabout way, we can get a little bit of understanding of community use by the output of the pump, as opposed to the number of the people. It's a little tough to track down.
Gotcha. David, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
I think those guys pretty well covered the question.
Okay.
I don't know what else to say.
Gotcha. Next, another question. What is the plan, or is there any concrete plan right now moving forward to install additional life pumps in Kenya? Rich?
Yeah, the part of the trip was to establish a supply chain there, or at least explore how we could get a supply chain in Kenya, which would ultimately lead to the ability to support the people that are there and supply more life pumps in a timely manner. So Francis was a very, very large advocate, saying he would like to even present the life pump to more people. He believes in it and has seen it. So we're working with him to sort of start the infancy stage of supply chain and distribution. We've met with 2 other people discussing that same thing, so that as it grows, we have additional options to expand it even further. But all that's in its infancy stage right now in development. But we are definitely looking to have a supply chain there, a presence in Kenya that will allow the growth of life pumps throughout Kenya.
Gotcha. Thank you. Let's see. What was something that surprised you the most on this trip, or was the most unexpected? David, you want to start us off with that?
Sure. I think one of the most surprising things, in a good way, was being able to turn up at a number of pumps that had been installed 7 years ago and nobody had touched, and they still worked. That's pretty amazing when you think about it, and pretty unheard of with hand pumps. And that's one of the big selling points of life pumps, as well as the longevity of them and the need for very little maintenance. And I think I don't think any of us really expected to turn up at 3 out of 4 pumps and have basically no issues from those 2014 pumps. So that was pretty cool to see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that we well, at least Steve and I had a healthy respect for what we might find with those 4 pumps. We were quite concerned, and I was early on, what's it going to take to bring these pumps up to speed? How difficult is it going to be to pull them out, to take them apart? And the situation, that's one of the reasons I really wanted Steve with me on this trip. I've traveled with him several times, and we've run into some pretty tough situations, and we're always able to talk through it, figure it out, move on, and come to a good solution. And it was so it was quite nice to come across these things. And virtually this whole trip, a lot of it due to the way David planned. He put a lot of the pieces together to make sure that our logistics went smooth, but it was just amazing how smooth everything went, how little there were very little difficulties that we had to overcome at all. And it was just, yeah, it was very pleasing to not have these catastrophic big problems. Made it a very easy trip.
Actually, David, each night would just take a note of answers to prayer. You know, we'd actually pray, Lord, can you help us to get this pump out and get it back in? You can't leave a village without water. So these answers to prayer were actually quite remarkable, and we just kept a big long list every day, and we're grateful for it. Daniel, one of the things that was partly a surprise and partly a reminder for me was the need for good relationships in the Western world. I'm a victim of the West, product of my culture. We tend to focus on time and money and projects and very specific about those things, and kind of isolated and individualistic. In contrast, Africa, Kenya, you name it, they tend to be more relational. And this is a fantastic lesson for me to learn and try and carry over into the Western world here in my culture where I live, is to focus more on the relationship and friendship basis of things that actually last a long time, and at the end of the day gets more things done. The last day we were there, we had the great honor to be invited to Francis's home, meet his wife, meet his child, go to his house, have a meal, have lunch. That's a very special thing, and we were honored to be able to do that. But it's a sign of a good, healthy relationship that we would even be invited to that place to do that. So we just left there with gratitude for all of those things. I think my little summary statement would be from Jomo Kenyatta, the first president of Kenya, 1964, when the country was recognized as their own country. He came up with a phrase that is it's Harambee, and what it means is working together, pulling together, serving for a common goal, and striving for the same things. And so Harambee is actually very much embedded in Kenyan culture, and certainly a good lesson for us.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, all 3 of you, for your response to that. There's a question related to the presentation that we had, so I wonder if we can bring up that graph. Yeah, in the presentation, there was a graph that showed usage of a particular life pump, and it seems like the daily usage peaked every 7 days, or that there was some kind of trend. Is there an explanation of that, or a reason why that is, or is that just particular to, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Not from the life pump in particular, but other pumps we've seen. If you put it by a church, they tend to get a far higher usage on a Sunday. Schools are the same. It tends to go down on the weekend, you see. So these patterns do show up in kind of strange ways, a little they're hard to predict, but a church will go up on a Sunday and a school will go down on a Saturday and Sunday. Generalization.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And let's see, there's one more question here. Could you comment on any obvious variations in sanitation systems, per se, between villages? Whether that's due to cultural differences, user preferences, any observations that may be relevant to, the Life Latrine project. So if you all don't know about that, that's another project that Design Outreach is working on right now to promote, sanitation and basically create an appropriate technology for latrines in these rural communities. So I wonder, Rich, do you have any thoughts on that, or can you speak to that?
It did vary widely, what we saw in the different areas. The POCOT area is probably the biggest need for increased sanitation areas. You don't see as much, they're more nomadic people, so they don't have the structures in the houses where they would be putting in a latrine per se. Whereas the other areas we were at were non-nomadic and people were building houses, and therefore they would build a latrine and have concrete pads inside. I'm not sure of all the different structures there, but they were a lot better around the churches and those things. So it depended on the area, but definitely the need to figure out how to help those nomadic communities is great.
One of the things that Francis taught us with his very good policies at World Vision when he was there was the very important policy of no open defecation in a village. And that's a very difficult thing to achieve because it does rely on a good latrine there. But once that is achieved, that goes a long way to protecting people in a village.
Right. One more question just came in. And then I will ask us one more to wrap us up. How do you feel like you saw God's hand in this trip for you personally, or for the work that you did in the communities? David, do you want to take that first?
Sure. I think for me, one of the big things is kind of what I talked about before, is just getting to be a part of the work that POM is doing. I just think their model for ministry and the work that they're doing is so impactful and so obvious in the way that they're engaging and reaching a people group who in Kenya is fairly marginalized. The Pokot tend to be a tribe that's fairly looked down upon by the other tribes. And so just to see the way that they are reaching the Pokot for Christ and using every tool that they possibly can to do that. They're very diverse in the way they go about that and really trying to take advantage of anything they can. And ultimately, I just think it's awesome to see and be a small part of the work that's happening there, that I know is leading to, there will be a group of Pokot people who are worshiping for eternity with us. And, I just can't overstate the value of being able to see that kind of a thing and be a part of it.
Steve, do you want to go next?
Yeah, one of the things I enjoyed God working the most in is actually confirming his own word. I mean, Isaiah 55 says that his word does not return void. Now, we don't hand out audio Bibles and follow people around to see what they're doing, but it's a remarkable thing to see that when that opportunity is given, it's going to have an impact, and we know that it's going to work itself out. We know that with the Pokot, they share audio Bibles, they do whatever they can to get access to that. A very special testimony from me was 2020. I went there again and worked with POM, and I met a guy, Abraham, who was not a Pokot person but working for POM, and he spoke Swahili only, not Pokot. And so when I was handing out audio Bibles, he was kind of disappointed that he didn't get a Swahili one. He was only Pokot ones, which are useless to him. So I made a promise. I said, Abraham, if I'm back here, I'll bring you an audio Bible. So I did, and it was a great joy to be able to hand a Swahili Bible to him just a couple of weeks ago.
Well, for me, it was just seeing God's movement throughout from the planning aspect of this trip clear through the completion of it. There was a lot of prayer in preparation of, hey, is this trip even able to happen? Are we even going to be able to make contacts in Kenya for the travel to be able to get to all these locations? There was just a lot of questions that were really had no answers. Yet as we prayed through and God kept opening doors, kept providing all sorts of resources that we didn't even know what we needed, to be honest, but God provided it. The prayer log that David had, we had well over 50 to 60 answers to prayer throughout the trip. So just seeing how when you depend on God, you rely on God, he does come through wholeheartedly. And the blessings that are put out when you go to serve God, it's not just a one-way street. It was really neat. I remember at Shivakala watching the kids pump the pump, which was just something that was really neat. And I turn around and David's over showing a group of guys that helped us install the pump how to work an audio line. And it was just a really neat blessing to see all that happen.
Amen. Amen. Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. My last question for you all is, I guess, kind of just a summary question that's connected to maybe what you already said, but just in the last couple of sentences, could you tell us what was like the most memorable or impactful moment for you? What was from this Kenya trip that will, leave the greatest impression? If you can think about that. We'll go in the same order: David, Steve, and then Rich.
Sure. I mean, I think there's just so many things you can take away from a trip like this. But one of the ones for me is just the caliber and quality of men that we got to work with, both with POM and these guys who used to work for World Vision, who are with us for most of the week. They all love the Lord. They're all solid believers. They're all great guys. It was fun to build relationships with them, but then also to see them work, to be able to teach them some things and learn some things from them. I can say very confidently, all three of us left feeling like we don't really need to go back to Kenya necessarily. Not that we don't want to, but these guys got it covered. They know what they're doing. And we are confident in that. And I think that was just one of the cool parts of the trip. And then you build these relationships that will last a lifetime, and being able to have brothers and sisters in Christ from other cultures and other countries and stuff is always a blessing and a cool thing.
Yeah, for me, just in closing, just the remarkable ways that technology can change a person's life. In fact, just expanding out from Kenya, but I just got a text from Dr. Bixler, Greg, just 10 minutes before the meeting. He's at another pump in Malawi called Kaenda, 708 days, 10,600 hours use without a breakdown. So it's just remarkable to think that these things are actually true. It can happen. We've seen it with our own eyes, privileged to be part of it.
Yeah, for me, just the things that I've already shared were things that I'll hold on to for quite some time. Just the opportunity to get back. This is the first time I've ever actually been back to a community that I've put a life pump in. Usually Steve and I are there, we're providing training. We go to the community and they get the life pumps in. And then Greg or Abe go with all the glory of seeing what's happening there and following up with those communities. And I think Greg likes walking in as a hero. So I don't know, but that's the first time I've ever been able to make it back to a community. So it was really, really neat to see how the life pumps impacted these people, and how we told them that we wanted to come back when we first installed. They always ask, will you come back? Because they think you're just there one time. So it was just really neat to see those communities once again. And that was something that impacted me quite a bit on the trip.
That's great. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much again to all three of you, our panelists. And thank you all for coming and listening to this coffee hour. We're really grateful for making that you would make time to hear them share about their trip to Kenya. We know your time is valuable, so we really appreciate it. And again, just to remind you, the recording of this coffee hour will be posted eventually to our website, so you'll be able to watch it at your leisure and share it with others. And we will send out an email with a link to that when it is available. And also, we would welcome your feedback if you have thoughts, questions that you never got to ask, or recommendations, suggestions for what we could for the team. Feel free to reach out to any of us if you know us personally, if you have our contact, or you can email us at info@doutreach.org. That's our general email. But yeah, we hope that you are encouraged. We hope you're inspired and excited about the work that we get to do with design outreach and with design outreach. And yeah, we're just so grateful that you were joining us. So hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday, a great rest of your week. Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Speakers, if you can hang on for a minute, please.
Do you say you wanted us to hang on for a second, Chris?